Hello, and welcome back to Forgeborn Hobbies. In this video, we finish up the Dracolich that we started last time and get it ready for our games of Dungeons & Dragons. Let's go ahead and let's get back to work. Alright, so here's where we left the model off last time. It is covered in milliput and a mixture of Mod Podge and tissue paper to kind of bulk out the skeleton, give it some musculature and some flesh. And now we just need to paint it to finish it off. This part of the making process was only difficult for two reasons. First is some of these painting steps take a long time to dry. Second part is my airbrush was just giving me a really hard time. I ended up having to buy some new parts to fix it and completely clean it out partway through airbrushing. I airbrush it with Vallejo Surface Primer Black to lay down a really good, really thick primer coat. And then I coat it with just standard Vallejo Air Black paint to really make sure that I get a solid black undercoat. Honestly, if I was going to do this again, I would just spray paint this model outside. I normally don't like to do that. I prefer to use an airbrush. But I think in this case, with something this big where you really need a good primer coat, just a straight black primer probably would have actually saved me a ton of time. And black primer is like $2.50 at the store. So it's really, I don't know what I was thinking here. I should have just done that. I just really got excited about getting this done. Once the black primer was down and the black undercoat was down, I used Vallejo's Intermediate Blue to just give some tone to the flesh. The straight black I thought would look a little bit weird later. This is another step I kind of wish I hadn't done. I wish I had just left it as black because it ended up turning gray in the end. But I think it still looks okay. I'm really happy with how it turned out. So, one little misstep that I wouldn't do again, it's not that big a deal. Once the blue was done, I went in with pure white Vallejo air paint through the airbrush and base coated everything that I wanted to be bone colored later. So all of the horns, the teeth, the claws, any of the skeleton that was sticking out. And I ended up putting some white in the membranes of the wings just so that they stand out a little bit more, give them a little bit more contrast with the bones in the wings. This took a while. This is where the airbrush really was giving me the most problems. This paint just kept drying up in the nozzle for some reason. I don't know why. I've never had a problem with it before. And after a few coats of this, just to make sure everything was hit where it was supposed to, we will move on to the next step, which is going to be dry brushing. Alright, now that all the airbrushing is done, we're going to do some pretty straightforward dry brushing. I have some cream, just generic craft paint, and I'm going to take a very big brush for this because it's a very big model, and I'm going to get as much paint off of this brush as I can, and I'm going to dry brush the entire model with this. This is going to catch all of the texture, all of the raised areas, everything that I just want to stand out a little bit more. While I want this to be a Black Dracolich, just having something that is a pure color just doesn't stand out enough on the table, especially. I want something that's going to catch some of the light, and I am going to go through and wash this anyways. So this really light highlight all over everything is going to get dulled down a lot. So every surface gets dry brushed, even the pure white gets dry brushed. That gives the edges a little bit of tone that yeah, you can kind of see later on. Now is the fun part. I am going to douse this model in a custom homemade wash that I stole from YouTuber Black Magic Craft. This is a mix of black craft paint, brown craft paint, and a lot of water. And as you can see, I am slathering this whole thing in this. I am not being stingy at all. This is a really easy craft paint wash to mix up. It costs almost nothing in the long run. That bottle of paints that I used, it barely made a dent in that supply. So I have no problem just going over this entire thing, and you can see I'm going back even and adding more wash as I go, just to make sure that it fills in those gaps really well. I want a lot of weathering, I want a lot of contrast on this, and so that's just going to take a long time. It also means that this is going to take a long time to dry. So once I do this, I think I left this until the next day, even though I had a couple hours I could have kept working on this, decided I was done here and it was time to move on to the next thing. Once this wash was dry, it was time to get the airbrush back out. I'm going to use this airbrush to apply white ink as a base coat for everything that's going to have a glowing effect in the end. This is the eyes, the mouth, the chest cavity, and the hip cavity. This is all the places that I felt like an unnatural, magical glow would look best emanating from. And I really need a white base coat on this to get a glowing effect. If there's any kind of shading, any kind of off color from the white, it will really stand out in the glowing effect. So I had to get rid of that. White ink is very thin, so you have to do several different coats of this. You have to let them dry as completely as possible between coats in order to get good solid coverage. That's what I had to do here. You'll see me jump back and forth between mouth and eyes and chest in order to get the best base coat that I can. And when that's ready, it's time for a mix of 5 drops of fluorescent blue ink and 10 drops of bright yellow ink. I think this is called cadmium yellow. It's from Liquitex, I think. Very vibrant. And when you do a 2-to-1 mix like this of 2 parts yellow to 1 part blue, you get this really awesome green that looks like the kind of acid or evil magic that would embody a Black Dracolich. I really love how this part turned out. It's really cool that even though I didn't have a fluorescent green, I could easily make one with what I had. I think that's one of the cool things about problem solving as a hobbyist, is when you can make it work with what you got. And you don't have to go out and buy the specific thing for everything you're doing. I think this whole model shows this pretty well. Once the inks were all laid down, and again, I had to do several thin coats of this in order to get a really strong color. I did several coats of matte varnish over this. Normally I don't do matte varnish on D&D stuff, but for this, I really wanted to even out all of the different textures and tones and finishes, and I wanted to make sure that the paint would be protected from when it gets used on the tabletop. And with that matte varnish down, this model's done. So here you have it, a finished Dracolich, ready for a party of adventurers to either fight or be eaten by. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that you found it inspiring and helpful for you as you think about your hobby adventure. If you like this video or the part 1 video, please make sure to like them. If you like what I do, please make sure that you subscribe. I'm planning on taking a break in the new year, but when we come back, I have a lot of cool videos planned, so I'm excited to see you then. In the meantime, though, please remember to stay safe, wear a mask, and keep hobbying.